The first time I pressed play, I thought my heart had stopped. Daniel's voice, by warm, soft, tender, filled the room. It startled me because I hadn't heard it in years. Not like this. "Baby," he whispered, the words rolling out like velvet. "Last night was unforgettable. I can still feel your skin on mine. I don't know how I'll survive until I see you again." And then came a sound that didn't belong to me. A laugh. A woman's laugh. Not mine. Hers. Selena. For years, Daniel had played the part of the perfect husband. To the world, we were the enviable couple. At company dinners, he held my hand, kissed my cheek, called me his rock. At family gatherings, he bragged about how lucky he was to have me. Strangers admired us. Women whispered they wished their husbands treated them like Daniel treated me. But I knew better. At home, his affection had long turned to silence. His kisses were perfunctory, his smiles rehearsed, his touch absent. I had lived beside him like a shadow, wondering if I had done something wrong, if I was simply unworthy of the warmth he gave so freely in public. And now, in 9 seconds, I had the answer. Daniel wasn't incapable of love. He wasn't cold by nature. He just saved it all for her. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, the walls pressing in. 15 years of marriage crumbled in less than 10 seconds. Every gala, every photo, every speech where he had called me his partner in front of smiling faces, all of it was a lie. He had never been my husband. Not really. He had only been playing the role. The real man. The man with warmth in his voice and laughter on his lips. Belonged to someone else. And he didn't even realize I knew. He thought the message had gone exactly where it belonged. To her. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's begin. From the outside looking in, we were the kind of couple people envied. Daniel Carter was everything a woman was supposed to want in a husband. Successful, handsome, charming. At corporate gatherings, he never missed a chance to slip an arm around my waist, to draw me close and kiss my temple as cameras flashed. He'd toast to me during speeches, calling me his backbone, his greatest blessing, his reason for every success. And the crowd would clap, faces beaming, hearts melting. Women would whisper to each other, "She's so lucky. He adores her." I used to smile through it all, perfectly poised in my silk dresses and polished heels, the good wife who stood by his side. On the surface, I was living the dream. But dreams look different from the inside. Behind closed doors, Daniel's warmth evaporated like smoke. The arm that held me so tightly at dinners fell away the moment we walked through our front door. His hand never lingered in mine once the crowd was gone. His voice, the one that could sound so tender, so adoring in public, hardened into clipped sentences, dismissive nods, and silence. Meals I cooked went barely touched. Conversations I tried to start dissolved into one-word answers. Nights in bed were spent with his back turned to me, his phone glowing in his hands until he fell asleep. I wasn't a partner. I was a prop. The polished house, the well-dressed wife, the flawless image. And for years I convinced myself that maybe this was what marriage looked like after time. Maybe love simply softened into routine, into quiet. Maybe the absence of affection wasn't cruelty. It was just life. But the truth was, I lived with a man who only knew how to perform love when there was an audience. The worst part was how others adored him. At Daniel's company galas, colleagues shook my hand and praised him endlessly. "He always speaks so highly of you. You're the reason he's so grounded. He's one of the good ones." I'd smile, nod, thank them politely, all while knowing that if those same people followed us home, they'd see silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. They'd see a man who never once asked how my day was, who never noticed the fresh flowers on the dining table or the new book on my nightstand. They'd see me eating dinner alone at the kitchen counter, while he locked himself in his study with work that seemed endless. They'd see that the Daniel Carter they admired didn't exist in our home. But I stayed. Why? Because I thought that was what loyalty meant. Because I told myself marriage wasn't about romance and passion. It was about building a life together. Because I thought that if I worked harder, loved him better, stayed silent long enough, maybe one day he'd come back to me. And because every time I considered speaking up, he'd find a way to remind me how admired he was. "People look up to us, Elaine," he'd say, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Don't let them see cracks where there don't need to be any." Cracks. That was what he called them. But I knew better. Cracks turn into chasms. Still, I kept playing my role. The flawless hostess. The doting wife. The woman who never raised her voice, never let her mascara run, never showed the ache of being unseen. It worked for a while. Enough to convince his colleagues, his family, even my friends. Enough to make me question my own instincts. But every time Daniel smiled at me in public, every time he whispered something sweet for others to overhear, a part of me withered. Because I knew the moment we got home, that smile would vanish like it had never existed. And yet I stayed. Because the alternative was admitting the truth. That my marriage wasn't a marriage at all. It was a performance. Looking back, I think a part of me always knew there was someone else. Not who, not when. But the possibility lingered like a shadow. His late nights, his sudden business trips, the way his phone never left his pocket, never sat face up on the table. He thought he was careful. He thought I was blind. But a wife knows, even when she says nothing, even when she keeps smiling, even when she plays her role to perfection, she knows when she's sharing her husband with another woman. I just never had proof. Not until the night that voice note came. 9 seconds of truth that shattered 15 years of lies. 9 seconds that turned the perfect marriage into a perfect illusion. And 9 seconds that marked the beginning of Daniel Carter's fall. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, rinsing the last of the dinner plates. The house was silent except for the low hum of the dishwasher. Daniel had left hours ago, claiming an urgent meeting with investors. I had smiled, kissed his cheek, and watched him leave without a trace of suspicion on my face. The clock on the wall ticked past 10 when my phone buzzed against the counter. I dried my hands on a towel and picked it up. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A voice note. From Daniel. He never sent me voice notes. He never sent me anything unless it was necessary. Running late. Don't wait up. Meeting tomorrow. His words were usually clipped, impersonal, efficient, just like our marriage. But this was different. My thumb hovered over the play button, my heartbeat rising. Something in my chest told me this was not for me. Still, I pressed play. At first, all I heard was his breath, uneven, hushed, too intimate for a business call. Then his voice low and soft, dripping with warmth I hadn't heard in years. "Baby," he whispered. The word cut me like a knife. In 15 years, Daniel had never once called me that. Not at home, not in bed, not in public speeches where he praised me in front of hundreds. Not once. "I can still feel you on me," he continued. "Last night was unforgettable. You drive me insane, you know that? I don't care what it costs. I'll find a way to see you again tomorrow. Same room. Same time." Then came the sound that shattered everything. A laugh. A woman's laugh. Light, breathless, full of joy. Not mine. Selena's. Her name wasn't spoken, but I knew. I'd seen it on a restaurant receipt tucked into his jacket. I'd heard it once, muffled, when he thought I was asleep. A whisper he brushed off as work. But hearing her voice, the intimacy of it, the way she fit into his words, stripped away every layer of denial I had built over the years. It was her. And it was him. Together. The message ended, the silence ringing louder than any sound. I stood frozen, my hand trembling so badly the phone nearly slipped. I pressed play again, desperate to convince myself I had misheard. But the words were the same. The laughter was the same. The tenderness I had longed for, begged for, prayed for. He had always been capable of it. He just chose to give it to her. I stumbled back into a chair, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. My chest ached like it might split open. I covered my mouth with my hand, but a sob tore through anyway, raw and broken. Because in that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost a husband. I had never really had one. I don't know how long I sat there, replaying the message over and over, my tears soaking the sleeve of my blouse. Minutes, hours. The night bled into dawn, but I couldn't stop. Each time I heard it, the wound grew deeper, but so did my clarity. Daniel Carter wasn't incapable of love. He wasn't incapable of tenderness. He simply rationed it, saved it for the woman he truly wanted. And to me, he gave nothing. That was the real betrayal. Not the affair, not the secrecy, but the truth that he had love to give, and he had chosen to give it everywhere, except to me. At some point, I dragged myself to the mirror. What I saw staring back at me was not the woman everyone else saw at company dinners, not the wife in silk dresses smiling at Daniel's side, not the flawless hostess with perfect hair and a polite laugh. What I saw was a woman hollowed out, eyes red and swollen, lips trembling, hands clutching a phone like it was a dagger. I leaned against the sink, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. How long had I been living like this? How long had I convinced myself silence was strength, that pretending was love? And how much longer did he think I would play along? The phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, just text. Leaving the office now. Be home in 20. Don't wait up. I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. He had no idea. Not a clue that in 9 seconds he had undone everything. And that ignorance was my weapon. He thought I was still blind. He thought I was still silent. But now I had the truth. And I wasn't going to waste it on screaming. I wasn't going to waste it on tears. I was going to wait. Wait until the moment was right. Wait until his audience was the largest, his stage the brightest, his pride the highest. And then I would press play. Not here in this quiet kitchen, but in front of everyone. That night, when Daniel finally returned, I was still awake. He kissed my cheek perfunctorily, muttered something about an exhausting day, and fell asleep within minutes. I lay beside him in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to his even breaths. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt no fear of losing him. Because he was already gone. The morning after the voice note, I woke before dawn. Daniel was still asleep beside me, his back turned, his breaths deep and even. The phone he guarded so jealously lay on the nightstand, inches from his hand. I stared at it, my chest tightening with the memory of the voice note, the echo of that laugh. For a fleeting moment, I considered reaching for it, unlocking it, scrolling until my fingers bled, but I didn't. Because I didn't need to rush. I had patience, and patience would be my weapon. When Daniel woke, he stretched, yawned, and kissed my cheek in the way he always did, a gesture polished for show, but empty of warmth. Long day, he muttered, already slipping into his suit. Big accounts coming up. I smiled, soft and practiced, the way I'd smiled 1,000 times before. Of course. You'll handle it beautifully, like you always do. He glanced at me briefly, perhaps searching for suspicion, but my face was calm. Perfect. He left the house convinced I was blind, and that was exactly what I wanted. The first thing I did was search the pockets of his suits. Daniel was meticulous but not flawless. Receipts crumpled in jacket linings, a key card for a hotel slipped into the wrong pair of trousers. notes scribbled hastily on the back of business cards. Each piece was a puzzle. A late-night meeting that aligned perfectly with a hotel stay. A charge at a restaurant neither of us had ever visited together. An Uber receipt from an address I didn't recognize. I photographed everything, storing the images in a hidden folder on my phone. The evidence piled higher with each passing day. At home, I studied him. The way his fingers lingered on his phone, his eyes lighting up at messages he never shared with me. The sudden bursts of laughter. Laughter I hadn't heard directed at me in years. The smell of cologne when he returned late at night, sharper, fresher, as though he had just come from her arms. I memorized it all. And yet, outwardly, I played the same role I always had. The loyal wife, the gracious hostess, the quiet shadow standing beside him at every corporate event. If anything, I leaned deeper into the role. I laughed when he made jokes at the dinner table. I kissed his cheek in front of colleagues. I let him believe I was still under the spell of the image he'd built, because the more comfortable he felt, the more careless he became. One evening, as he showered, his phone buzzed on the dresser. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't hesitate. I picked it up. The lock screen glowed with a single notification. A name. Selena Moore. And beneath it, 4 words that confirmed everything. Can't wait for tomorrow. The air left my lungs in a rush. My vision blurred. But instead of breaking, I snapped a photo. Carefully. Silently. Then I placed the phone exactly where it had been. By the time Daniel stepped out of the bathroom, I was already in bed, pretending to read. He kissed my forehead, oblivious. I smiled back, my lips steady, though my heart was roaring like thunder. In those weeks, I mastered the art of silence. I moved through each day with the calm precision of a woman rehearsing for the role of a lifetime. Breakfast served, clothes ironed, polite conversation when he chose to speak. But inside, I was cataloging every detail, every slip, every betrayal. And the clearer the picture became, the calmer I felt, because I knew where this was leading. And it wasn't to another argument behind closed doors. No, it was to a stage big enough for his entire world to watch him crumble. That stage came in the form of the annual Carter Wells corporate gala. It was the event of the year. Black tie, champagne fountains, reporters snapping photos of executives and their spouses, a celebration of deals closed, of power displayed. Daniel thrived at these events. He gave speeches that charmed investors, shook hands that secured fortunes. And always, always he made sure I was polished at his side, the perfect accessory to his success. But this year would be different, because this year, I would not be his accessory. I would be his undoing. I began planning carefully. The dress, bold, red, a color I hadn't worn in years, chosen not for Daniel but for me. The jewelry, simple, elegant, just enough to catch the light when the cameras flashed. The phone, charged, the voice note locked and ready to play with the tap of a finger. Every detail mattered. Because when Daniel Carter took the stage that night, basking in applause, smiling that hollow smile of his, I would be waiting. And when the moment was right, when his pride stood tallest, I would strike. In the weeks leading up to the gala, Daniel was more radiant than ever. He strutted through the house, humming under his breath, grinning at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. Biggest deal of my career, he told me one night, pouring himself a drink. This gala's going to be unforgettable. I met his eyes, my smile serene. Yes, I said softly. Unforgettable. He didn't hear the steel beneath my voice. On the night of the gala, as I stood before the mirror adjusting the red silk gown over my shoulders, I saw not the broken woman who had cried herself to sleep weeks ago. I saw someone sharper, stronger. Not the wife Daniel had dismissed, ignored, discarded, but the woman he had underestimated, and he would learn, in front of everyone he admired, everyone he craved approval from, that his silence had not destroyed me, it had armed me, and I was ready. I had always imagined she would be hidden, a shadow, tucked away in hotel rooms, a secret he protected at all costs. But Selena Moore wasn't hiding. I saw her for the first time on a rainy Thursday afternoon, outside the glass doors of Daniel's office building. She was younger than me, mid to late 20s maybe. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, her lipstick a bold shade that clashed with the gray sky above. She leaned against the wall like she owned it, her phone pressed to her ear, laughter spilling into the street. And Daniel walked out of those glass doors minutes later. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked pleased. My breath caught in my throat as I watched from across the street, shielded by the awning of a cafe. His smile, the warm, easy one I hadn't seen in years, lit up his face. He glanced around quickly, then reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. They walked away together, close enough that anyone with eyes could see. I sank back into my chair, gripping my coffee cup so tightly the heat seared my palms. People around me carried on with their lives, unaware that my world was cracking open just a few feet away. It wasn't just that Daniel was cheating. It was that he wasn't even trying to hide it. All this time I had told myself I was protecting his image, preserving our reputation, keeping the illusion alive for the sake of his career. But the truth was uglier. He didn't care. Not about me. Not about the marriage. Not even about appearances. He had paraded her to the very doorstep of his empire, and no one stopped him. In the days that followed, I began to notice how many people already knew. At corporate dinners, his colleagues' glances lingered a little too long. Their smiles wavered when they looked at me. Conversations stuttered, then shifted when I approached. They knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not her name, but they knew enough. The sympathy in their eyes told me everything, and it cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Because while I had been hosting parties, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, I had been a fool, the last to know, the only one still playing the role. One evening I followed him. He said he had a late meeting. I kissed his cheek, adjusted his tie, and wished him luck. Then, 20 minutes later, I slipped into my car and drove after him, careful to keep my distance. The GPS app on my phone tracked his license plate easily enough. He wasn't heading to the office. He was heading downtown, to a rooftop restaurant, candlelight flickering in the glass windows. I parked across the street, my fingers tight on the steering wheel. And there she was again, Selena, dressed in a black dress that clung to her every curve, laughing as though the world belonged to her. Daniel stood beside her, pulling out her chair, his hand brushing her lower back as though it was the most natural thing in the world. The waiter poured wine. Their glasses clinked. Her hand reached across the table to cover his. And Daniel, my husband, the man who had dismissed me, ignored me, treated me like furniture in my own home, leaned forward with that smile. The smile everyone believed was mine. My chest ached, my stomach twisted, but I didn't move. I lifted my phone instead. Snap, one photo, then another, then another. The evidence was mine. And yet, staring at them through the screen, I realized something chilling. Selena wasn't ashamed. She wasn't glancing over her shoulder, worried about being caught. She wasn't nervous, fidgeting, or afraid. She laughed freely, touched him boldly, basked in his attention like she had earned it. She wanted to be seen. She wanted the world to know she had taken what was mine. That night, I lay awake replaying every detail in my mind. Her laugh, her boldness, her youth. The contrast between us was sharp, and maybe that was the point. I was restraint, composure, dignity. She was wild, carefree, reckless. And Daniel, with all his power and charm, had chosen her. But that choice would destroy him. Because Selena wasn't discreet. She was a liability. And when the gala came, when the cameras flashed and the stage was his, I would not be the only one exposing him. He had already exposed himself. 2 nights later, I saw her again. This time, not in secret. At a corporate cocktail hour, mingling freely among Daniel's colleagues. Her laugh carried across the room, her hand brushing his arm as though they had no one to answer to. I watched from a distance, a glass of champagne steady in my hand. Colleagues exchanged glances, whispers rippling like static through the room. But no one said a word. Because Daniel Carter was untouchable. Or at least, he thought he was. That night, as we drove home, Daniel talked about the gala, his voice brimming with pride. Biggest event of the year, he said, adjusting his cufflinks as the city lights blurred past the car window. Investors, press, the whole board. This is where everything comes together. I turned my head to watch him, studying the arrogance in his profile, the way his smile curved as though the world was his stage. Yes, I whispered, my voice low but steady. Everything will come together. He didn't catch the weight in my words, but I did. Because Selena had made one mistake too many, and Daniel had made the fatal one. They had believed they were untouchable, but the gala was coming, and I would be there. Not as his wife, not as his shadow, but as the storm that ended them both. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and the clinking of champagne glasses. Strings of violins filled the space as waiters in crisp white jackets weaved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Daniel thrived in places like this. He was already surrounded by board members and investors, his laughter ringing out above the music, his handshake firm, his smile flawless. He looked every bit the man they all admired, the golden executive, the devoted husband, the polished host. And at his side, me. But tonight I wasn't the prop he thought I was. I wore red. A bold, striking red gown that caught every light, every eye. My hair swept elegantly over my shoulder, my head high, my face serene. People whispered as I passed, but not the usual pitying whispers. Tonight they couldn't look away. And Daniel, he didn't even notice. He was too busy charming the room, flashing that smile that had fooled them all. I saw her too. Selena. She hovered at the edge of the crowd, a glass of champagne in her hand, her dress shimmering like she thought she belonged here. She laughed too loudly, leaned too close to Daniel whenever she thought no one was watching. But I was watching. And so were others. The looks, the whispers. They knew. They were just waiting for someone to say it. That someone would be me. Dinner passed in a blur of speeches and toasts. Daniel took the stage at last, his tuxedo immaculate, his confidence radiating. He spoke about leadership, about vision, about loyalty. Words that once might have stirred admiration in me now scraped like broken glass. Most of all, he said, raising his glass, I owe everything to my wife, Elaine, the woman who has stood by me, supported me, believed in me. Without her, none of this would be possible. Applause thundered through the ballroom. All eyes turned to me. I smiled. The perfect wife smile I had perfected over 15 years. But inside, my blood burned. When the applause died down, I rose slowly from my chair. The movement drew attention instantly. A hush fell over the tables as I stepped toward the stage, heels clicking against marble, my phone glinting in my hand. Daniel's smile faltered. Elaine, he said, laughter in his voice but unease in his eyes. What are you? I didn't answer. I climbed the steps, my gown sweeping behind me, and stood at his side. Then I held the phone to the microphone and pressed play. His voice filled the ballroom. Baby, last night was unforgettable. I can still feel your skin on mine. I'll find a way to see you tomorrow. Same room, same time. A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes widened. Selena's hand froze midair, her champagne glass trembling. And then came her laugh. That unmistakable laugh. the sound of his mistress echoing through the chandeliers, through the gilded walls, through every corner of the room. The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed, his hands trembling against the podium. "Elaine," he hissed, his voice low, urgent. "Stop this. Not here." But it was too late. The evidence had already spoken. I turned to him, my voice steady, cold. "For 15 years you paraded me like a trophy. You told the world I was your rock, your partner, your everything. And I smiled. I played my role. I carried your image like a burden. But behind closed doors, you gave me nothing. Not a kind word, not a touch, not a laugh. And now the world can hear what I already knew." Gasps rippled again. Whispers rose like waves crashing against the ballroom walls. People leaned to each other, eyes darting, lips moving in hurried shock. Daniel's hands gripped the podium, his knuckles white. His polished mask was gone. In its place was a man stripped bare, humiliated, cornered. Selena shifted uncomfortably, her face flushed crimson. She tried to slip toward the exit, but every eye followed her. Whispers hissed through the crowd. "That's her, the mistress." Her name spread like wildfire. She clutched her purse tighter, her chin trembling as she pushed through the crowd. But there was no escaping now. She was branded. Daniel's voice cracked. "Elaine, please, let's talk about this privately." I turned back to him, my eyes like steel. "Privately? That's how you built this lie. In shadows, in whispers, in hotel rooms." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear, though the microphone still caught it. "You don't get privacy anymore. Not after this." The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, slowly, people began to stand. Not for Daniel, for me. The applause was soft at first, hesitant, then stronger. Not loud, not celebratory, but deliberate. A recognition of my strength, of his downfall. I lowered the phone, the voice note finally silenced. I didn't need to say more. The truth had done my work for me. As I stepped off the stage, I didn't look back at Daniel. I didn't need to. Because I knew. He was finished. By the time I reached the lobby, cameras were flashing, reporters already buzzing with questions, their pens scratching furiously against notepads. And me? I walked past them all, head high, hand steady over my heart. For the first time in years, I felt light, because the performance was over, and Daniel Carter's mask had shattered in front of everyone. The fallout began before the champagne flutes had even been cleared from the ballroom. By the next morning, the voice note had already spread through every corridor of Carter Wells. Board members whispered in hushed tones, employees avoided his gaze, and the once steady tide of admiration that followed Daniel Carter had turned to ripples of pity and disgust. His phone rang nonstop that morning. Investors, clients, old friends. But each call seemed shorter than the last. Each ended with clipped words, stiff voices, or outright silence. By noon, the firm's legal team requested a meeting. By evening, his seat on the board, the one he'd polished his entire career to hold, was in jeopardy. I watched it unfold from a distance. No words were needed. The truth was a wildfire that needed no stoking. The man who had once been untouchable now walked the halls with hunched shoulders, his polished shoes scuffing against marble floors. His colleagues still greeted him, but the warmth was gone. Their smiles were strained, their eyes cold. He felt it. For the first time in his life, Daniel Carter wasn't admired. He was pitied. And Selena? She lasted less than a week. At first, she stood bold, chin high, daring anyone to shame her. But the whispers followed her through every corridor, every meeting. That's her. The mistress. The laugh. She tried to call him during the day. He ignored her. She showed up at his office once, her mascara streaked, her voice sharp with anger. But when I passed by later that night, her car was gone. She had fled. Because women like Selena didn't want to fight for love. They wanted the performance. And when the performance ended, so did she. Daniel came home late one evening, his tie loose, his hair disheveled, his shoulders slumped. He stood in the doorway of our kitchen, staring at me like a man seeing his reflection in a shattered mirror. "You've destroyed me," he whispered, his voice raw. I looked up from my glass of wine, calm, steady. "No, Daniel, you destroyed yourself." His lips trembled. "Do you know what I've lost? My career, my reputation, everything I've built. And do you know what I lost?" My voice rose for the first time in weeks. 15 years of my life to a man who treated me like furniture. 15 years of silence. 15 years of carrying your mask while you lived a lie. He flinched, his hands tightening into fists. But he didn't argue, because there was nothing left to say. The days turned into weeks, and the empire Daniel had built crumbled piece by piece. The board voted him out. Clients withdrew contracts. Invitations to events disappeared. He, who once commanded every room he entered, now barely left the house. I would hear him pacing late into the night, muttering, cursing under his breath. Sometimes his voice broke and I'd hear the sound of something shattering. A glass, a chair, his pride. The man who had once been everyone's golden boy had turned into a ghost in his own home. And me? I breathed again. For the first time in years, I could walk into a room without feeling like a shadow. I could look in the mirror and see not a prop, not a placeholder, but a woman who had survived. Neighbors approached me in the street, their voices soft, their eyes kind. "We didn't know," they said. "We're so proud of you." At first, their pity stung, but then I realized it wasn't pity. It was respect. One evening, I found Daniel sitting in the darkened living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The curtains were drawn, the television silent. When I stepped into the room, he looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "You've won," he said flatly. I studied him for a long moment, then shook my head. "No, Daniel. There was never a competition. There was only the truth. And the truth doesn't choose sides. It simply reveals." He looked away, his jaw tight, his fingers trembling around the glass. I left him there, in the shadows he had created for himself. The man who had once thrived on applause now lived in silence. The man who had once worn perfection like a tailored suit now carried shame like chains. And I, the woman he had dismissed, ignored, underestimated, was finally free. The storm passed, not quickly, not gently, but with a long, crushing silence that followed Daniel everywhere he went. Weeks turned into months, and the man who once commanded boardrooms and ballrooms alike became a footnote. His name whispered not with admiration, but with pity. At Carter Wells, new executives rose in his place. His seat at the table was filled without ceremony. His phone, once a constant stream of calls, sat silent on the desk. Daniel Carter had become irrelevant, and he knew it. One afternoon, I returned from the market and found him in the study. The curtains were drawn, the air stale, his tie undone. Papers littered the floor. He was hunched over his desk, staring at a glass of whiskey that had long since gone warm. When he heard me, he didn't look up. "They don't answer my calls anymore," he said, his voice hollow. "Men I built this company with, friends, colleagues, they look through me now like I don't exist." I set the groceries down, my movements deliberate, calm. "You don't exist to them," I replied softly. "Not the man you pretended to be. That man was a mask, and masks don't survive once they're ripped away." His shoulders sagged, his hand tightening on the glass. For a moment I thought he might cry, but instead he laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You've ruined me, Elaine." I met his gaze, my voice sharp but steady. No, Daniel, you ruined yourself. All I did was stop protecting you from the truth. But he no longer argued, because even he knew there was nothing left to say. As for Selena, she vanished as quickly as she had arrived. I heard she moved cities, chasing another man with a bigger title, a shinier mask. She never called, never returned. Perhaps she had never loved him either. Perhaps Daniel had been nothing more than another conquest, another stepping stone. And perhaps that was the cruelest cut of all. The mistress he had sacrificed everything for hadn't even stayed. But me? I didn't vanish. I didn't hide. I rebuilt. Piece by piece, I reclaimed myself. The woman I had been before Daniel's shadow. The woman who smiled because she wanted to, not because she was expected to. I joined charity boards, began speaking at women's circles, found my voice again. People who once pitied me now leaned in to listen. Women whispered, "She's stronger now. She survived." And they were right. Because I hadn't just survived Daniel Carter, I had outlived him. On the night of the next corporate gala, I stood at the edge of the ballroom again. The chandeliers glittered as they always had. The violins swelled with familiar notes. But this time, I wasn't standing at his side. I was standing alone. And yet, I had never felt less alone. Because everywhere I turned, eyes met mine not with pity, but with respect. Not as Daniel Carter's wife. Not as the woman who had been betrayed. But as Elaine Carter. Whole. Unbroken. Seen. And Daniel? I caught a glimpse of him near the bar. A shadow of the man he once was. Shoulders slumped, eyes dull. People passed him by without pause, without recognition. For the first time, I didn't feel pain when I looked at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. I felt nothing. And sometimes nothing is the sweetest kind of freedom. I turned, lifted my glass, and smiled. Because the truth wasn't just his downfall. It was my liberation. What do you think happens next? Do men like Daniel ever learn from the ruins they create, or do they keep chasing shadows until nothing is left? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gripped you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss our next tale.